Hi, and thank you for volunteering for the BVEF Art Docent program. The goal of the program is to teach students art techniques as part of their art education. This lesson is called Watercolor Flowers, and the goal is to teach advanced watercolor techniques to the students. At this point, your kids have probably been painting with watercolors. In fact, if you'd like to go borrow your kids' watercolors and play along during the video, you're more than welcome to. So this is going to teach the kids just some new techniques as well as color blending. So they're going to be given a limited palette in order to create the project today. So to begin with, I'm going to show you the supplies we give for the lesson. The bins are located behind the main office, so if you have any questions, you can just ask at the front desk and they can tell you where to get the bins. So in the bin, we have a binder with the information about the lesson. There's no need to add additional lessons. The one in there will be sufficient. There's stickers to go on the artwork to let parents know where the artwork is coming from. This is a watercolor project, so there are watercolors and cups for water, as well as a jug. You can fill this up at the sink and then pour into the water cups at the students' desks, and watercolor brushes. This lesson also comes with a bunch of circle templates and a beautiful bouquet of fake flowers, which do not bring this out at first. Leave this in the bucket for sort of to explain the lesson in stages. The bucket also contains watercolor paper and scratch watercolor paper for the students to test their new techniques on. And we also have spare watercolor pucks. And these are in case in the middle of the lesson a kid uses up all their watercolors, you can replace the watercolor. Don't forget to also bring the yellow folder of extra artwork. This where you can display the lovely watercolor pictures of springtime flowers around the classroom for inspiration. I think they're all upside down. Okay, so bring those with you as well. In that yellow folder is also this lovely example of the techniques they're going to use. So before I go any further, I want to talk about the actual watercolors. So what you'll see when you open them up will be a limited palette of colors. This program is only using red, yellow, green, and blue. So as you can see, we have filled the palette, even putting some of these lower colors in, because this is technically enough paint for a lesson. This one, on the other hand, this is enough paint, and we've just filled the empty place with a placeholder to kind of keep it together. But clearly this one is not enough paint. So I would pop out the empty one, go into your spare buckets, and you can pop it in. Now, this is not something we anticipate you having to do. If anything, this happens mid-lesson because maybe this is what their paint palette looks like and they use up all their blue in the middle of the lesson, so they raise their hand and they can get a new puck. Generally, the art supply coordinator will have these ready for you, clean and tidy, and filled up with all the paint you need. But the spares are there just in case. Go ahead and put the pucks back into the bag. That way we can use them just as placeholders where we need to. I will go over at the end of the lesson how to clean these up for storage. And that's just to help our supply coordinator out. So the volunteer supply coordinator will make sure your box is completely full and ready for your lesson. They will generally only put in enough supplies for your lesson, so don't be surprised if at the end of the lesson you're only putting a few more pieces of paper in. That should be pretty normal. You don't need to alert them about that, but please do alert us if the watercolors are an absolute mess, if there's a big problem here, so that we can make sure that that's ready to go for the next lesson. What we want to start the children off with is a bit of an abstract idea, and the point for this is to not limit their imaginations right at the beginning. So they should have pencils at their desks, and you'll give them each a piece of watercolor paper, and there should be enough templates to go around, and they'll take it and they will trace the circle on their watercolor paper to be cut out at a later time. And the first thing you want to do at this point is you've already distributed paint and water and brushes to all the students. They need to prime their paints, and to do this, they're going to start by squeezing a few drops of water into each of the colors, and this gets the paint softened up, ready for the lesson. And by all means, encourage them to use up the lesser of the two so that we can replace things in an efficient manner. All right, so now this first part's pretty fun. What they're going to do is they are actually going to make their entire piece of paper wet. So using their brush, they're going to get the whole circle as wet as they possibly can. And this is going to help the paint to spread and really cover the surface of the paper. And we're leaving this first part abstract because if they know they're painting flowers at this point, they may try and make these initial images smaller because they think of flowers as small things. So right now we're just maybe talking color theory, and we're painting blobs. So I'm going to start with yellow, and right in the center I'm going to paint a big blob about as big as my fist. There we go. Give them all a napkin as well. There's a technique. It's not such a big deal with yellow, but once we start getting to the other colors, if you can clean out the brush on your napkin before dipping it in the water, you're actually going to keep your water cleaner longer, which is helpful for having to run around and refill kids' waters. So I'm going to now do a couple smaller blobs, maybe another great big one. And they are filling their paper with colorful blobs of just the three primary colors. No green yet, just the three primaries. And what's neat is if they overlap them, they might end up with some new colors. So it's no longer just blue and red, but look, now I've got some other colors starting to come out. And it's okay if they go off the edge of the paper. It's actually kind of makes it a little more interesting. We can talk about color theory too at this point. We're going to get into it a little bit further. So big blobs. I kind of got smaller with my blobs, but you can encourage them to go bigger and bolder with their blobs. Mix a little blue in there. There we go. Okay. Now, this gets set aside to dry because this is the background, and we want this completely dry for the next stage of the process. So at this point, you can give them the scrap sheets of paper, and they're going to learn some pretty cool new techniques. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the color theory. So have them get their yellow. You want them to start with yellow, and you want it really wet. So it's just flowing across the paper. My yellow's not real pretty anymore, but it's still yellow. I'm going to clean my brush. And I'm going to get just the tiniest amount of red. And then I'm going to fill that in and mix it. And you can ask them what color this is. And they're going to answer orange because they're smart. But what I want you to do next is actually get that pure red and paint right next to it. And then they'll go, oh, it is orange, how cool. All right, so you can do that again with all your other different colors. Okay, so now you've pretty much shown them how they can achieve different colors even though all we've given them is a palette of primaries. And they do have green, which will give a different kind of green, but at this point we want them to be able to explore with these different colors. Okay, so we're going to do all the different strokes. So to start out with, we're going to do a spiral stroke, and I'm going to start with red. And I'm going to load it up with red paint. And where I'm going to hold it very perpendicular. I'm going to hold it at the top, and I'm actually going to use my elbow and my arm. I'm not using my wrist to do this stroke. I'm using my elbow. And since you and I know we're doing flowers, you're going to see how by it being a little wavy as I go around, now we've got what kind of looks like the top of a rose. And if I do the same thing, but broken, you can imagine the top of a chrysanthemum or a carnation. And so we're doing these different flowers. And before you get to these shapes, it's okay to go ahead and explain to them that what they're doing, so I'm going to stop here a second. What they're doing is they are painting a flower bouquet, but their point of view is the top. So the point of view for the bouquet is the top. So at this point, you can kind of start, when you reference these different strokes you're going to be doing, you can point out how these flowers, if you squish them onto a piece of paper, they would have that ruffly look, whereas something like a rose, and of course there's not a rose in here, would have a little bit more of a concentrated, like a smoother look to it. So now they know they're doing flowers. All right, so back to strokes. So the next stroke we're going to do is called a stipple stroke, and this one is going to have a lot of variation to it depending on what the kids want to do. So if we load up with one color, so I'm going to load up with red, and then I'm going to dip into the blue and get a little bit of blue right on the tip of my red. If I press and drag and lift up, and press and drag and lift up, I can create these petals like a little squashed flower look. I'll do it again. Again, just a little bit of blue up there. I'm going to do another round. So maybe this is some kind of daisy or a zinnia, but it's got these petals. And depending on what they want to do, with their petals, they can also maybe create a little three thing. They can start to generate flowers we've never heard of before. And get a little more blue on my tip. And that's probably going to change the look of my petals. Because now I got a lot of blue. That's okay. Alright, so that's a stipple stroke. And you can see how it's blending the blue and the red together in a variety of different ways. So it's not just one color, it actually ends up having a lot of interest in it with all the different colors. And we're going to do that again with stems and leaves. So load up with the yellow and get just a bit of blue. And then as you pull, you're going to get all these different colors. And then I'm going to pull up and lift for leaves. Pull up and lift. And do this one and pull down. You can see I'm getting all sorts of different colors and because of how I loaded my brush. And if I go in and just tip barely into that blue again, I'm going to get a lot of blue this time. Yep. And so there's some different leaves. And if we go back to these, then maybe we're almost doing that stipple stroke just to get a couple different leaf ideas. We'll connect that up to a bigger leaf. But again, it's this idea of color blending with our watercolors that your kids may not be doing at home, and that we're allowing them to explore here in this art class. So we've got a whole bunch of different greens going on and different leaves, and you can allow them to really explore and kind of play with all these different strokes for a bit. And then when it's time, they can set this aside and get their larger pieces. And now, maybe they get it. They're like, oh, so this is the background, and I'm going to apply all these different shapes and strokes onto my colors. And so if anything's wet, like this area is wet over here, I'd probably avoid it, and I'd go over here and I'd be doing some stuff over here. So I'm going to go and turn this one into, I'm going to actually dip into that yellow and do one of these chrysanthemum ideas. When the children are finished, the picture will be allowed to dry, and then at some point they can work with their teacher to cut it out. So make sure they have their name somewhere on the back. That would be something to do at the beginning before they lay any color down at all. And that's it for the students. So that is going to go into the teacher's possession to be distributed to the parents. So the final art docent task is to clean up the palettes, and I'm going to do something that a kid would do there. All right, so now the yellow looks like a kid actually was in it. What you do is you take a wet rag and just wipe it out, and that's it. This one's not a great example because obviously there's such little pigment left, but you'll be surprised by if you just make these a little bit wet, it just cleans up the pigment really nice. So it's just one color and it's ready to go for the next student. So again, this is a bad example. I'd probably be replacing just about all of these different pigments. So, but you understand that we need you guys to clean these out to make the life of our supply coordinator a lot easier. Well, with that, I'd like to thank you on behalf of Bennett Valley Art Education. Thank you for volunteering to be an art docent.